Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. You found your way to the Minnesota Department of Agriculture First Bite and Full Tray Grant information session. Thanks for joining us. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat if you'd like to. And at any point during the presentation, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. We will have time at the end to answer questions live. And if we are, for any reason, not able to get to all the questions, we'll follow up in writing. There will also be, this is being recorded, as I mentioned, so the recording will be posted and we'll send a follow-up email. So you'll have all the information you ever wanted, all the ways you ever wanted. So my name's Nora Shields Cutler. I work for the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, and I'm so grateful to have some MDA friends here, Minnesota Department of Agriculture friends here, to tell you all about the AGRI First Bite and Full Tray grants. So I'll pass it to Kate.
Hello, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. My name is Kate Siebold. I work at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture in the Ag Marketing and Development Division, and I work as our agency's Farm to Institution Coordinator. So I work on institutional market development for Minnesota grown and raised foods. And as part of my role, I get to spend a lot of time working on farm to school and farm to early care, including working with my colleague Emily Mayer on these grant programs. So I will pass it to Emily to introduce herself.
Thanks, Kate. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Emily Mayer. I manage the farm to school grants at the Department of Agriculture. So we can go ahead and get started. We'll do a quick overview of what this call will entail today. So we'll talk about the different opportunities of our farm to school and early care programs that we offer at the Department of Agriculture. We're going to talk in more detail about the fiscal year 2025 First Bite and Full Tray grants, and that's what you would be eligible to apply for as participants on this call. We'll kind of go through the grant projects, eligible expenses, how to apply. So hopefully when you leave this call, you know exactly what you need to do. And then we'll also share some learnings from our farm to school and early care evaluation. And then at the end, we'll have some time for some Q&A. So as we're going through the slides today, if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat or save them until the very end. All right, so the AGRI Farm to School and Early Care programs are grant and funding opportunities that we have through the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. And the purpose of these grants is to increase the amount of Minnesota grown and raised foods used in school and early care nutrition programs, and then also to expand market opportunities for Minnesota farmers. We have 3 opportunities for funding for K-12 schools and school districts, as well as early care education centers, ECE centers. So we have the First Bite grant, the Full Tray grant, and then there's an option to also apply for funds for an equipment grant. We'll go into those 3 programs in a little bit more detail in a minute. And then also new this year, we have the Local Tots Cost Share, which is a program for in-home daycares to purchase Minnesota grown and raised foods to serve as a part of their meal program. So lots of exciting farm to school opportunities. So this year we'll talk about, we're going to talk about the fiscal year 2025 grant opportunities that we currently have open. We have just under $1 million available for funding these grant programs. The application's currently open now, but it will be for purchases that would start in spring of 2025 through December of 2027. So you apply for funding this year, you might receive a fiscal year 2025 grant, but it's really 2.5 years of funds to spend. So the application is currently open. The deadline is October 24th at 4 o'clock. And these funds can be used to purchase Minnesota grown and raised food items, and then also kitchen equipment that supports or advances your farm to school program. So as I mentioned previously, we have two different grant options. We have the First Bite grant and the Full Tray grant. The First Bite grant is for schools and ECE centers who are brand new to farm to school and early care. These are sort of mini grants or smaller grant opportunities that have no match required. So you can request up to $5,000, and that means you would receive that full $5,000 and not have to front any money to get that grant award. The First Bite grant, you can only receive it once. So if you've previously received it, you would have to apply for the Full Tray grant this year. The Full Tray grant is intended for schools and ECE centers who have some prior experience with farm to school. This grant's a little bit bigger, and the idea is to help you expand those relationships that you've already built with local farmers. So this grant is up to $35,000. We'll go into the specifics of how you figure out that amount in a minute. And this grant does have a 1-to-1 match requirement. So that means we will pay you on a reimbursement basis 50% of what you submit to us. So something just to keep in mind. And then in addition to either of those two grants, you have to apply for either the First Bite or Full Tray, and then you can also apply for the equipment grant. And that's additional funding on top of the funds that would be used for food. These funds are just for kitchen equipment, up to $25,000, and these also have a 1-to-1 match requirement. So the First Bite grant, as I mentioned, it's for schools and ECE centers with little or no farm to school experience. You're eligible for the first year only that you're applying for this grant. Up to $5,000 and no match is required. The focus of these programs is high impact intentional farm to school and early care efforts and programs. So letters of support are not required for this. The application for the First Bite program, it's a little bit simplified, a little bit easier to fill out compared to the Full Tray, just because oftentimes when you're applying for the First Bite, you're just starting to dabble in the world of farm to school, and we want this to be a learning opportunity so you can get your footing underneath you. So the other opportunity is the Full Tray grant. This is for new or expanded farm to school and early care purchases. The maximum amount that you can request for the Full Tray grant is $35,000. This is based on the number of meals that you served in October of 2023. So it sounds a little bit complicated. It's not that complicated, but if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. The way you would figure out what you are eligible for is taking the number of your reimbursable meals served, you would times it by 10 cents and then times that amount by 12 months. We can help you with that if you need any help. With the Full Tray grant, also letters of support are required. So we're looking for letters from producers who you might already be working with. That is required. We're also looking for letters from maybe a new producer who you're hoping to work with, from distributors. The letter from distributors would be identifying the local farms that they're sourcing from, and then also community partners who are involved in your farm to school programming. So with those letters of support, we're just looking for additional information that sort of gives a little bit more about the background of your farm to school program. So multi-site early care education centers. If you are a multi-site ECE center, you can submit one application on behalf of all of the locations who are participating in the Child and Adult Care Food Program, or CACFP. If you're applying for a First Bite grant, the multi-site center will be capped at the maximum amount for First Bite grants, which is $5,000. If you're a Full Tray applicant and a multi-site center, you would be eligible for up to $35,000, depending on that formula that I had mentioned previously with your meals served times 10 cents times 12 months. So again, if you have questions, reach out while you're filling out your application. We're happy to help with that process. And then a little bit more about the equipment grant. So this grant is in addition to the First Bite and Full Tray food grants. You can request up to $25,000 with a match, 1-to-1 match requirement. So we would again pay 50% of the eligible expenses that you submit. So these equipment that you could purchase, it's intended to help you buy, prepare, or serve more Minnesota grown and raised foods in your food programs. So oftentimes we'll see, as you can see in the pictures, there's salad bar equipment, combi ovens, roasters, braising pans, things like that. Robocoups are a lot of the items that we see come in often.
All right.
And with that, I'll pass it over to Kate. Thanks, Kate.
Definitely. So we just wanted to share some examples and information on kind of the type of grant projects that these grants can support in terms of increasing your purchases of Minnesota grown and raised foods. So when thinking about grant project activities, we're really looking for projects that will start or expand the purchasing of Minnesota grown and raised foods. So in your application, there are questions kind of asking your plans for how you'll be doing this. So some examples of what project activities could look like include, trialing new Minnesota grown products on the menu, or, during mealtime. It could be choosing to participate in the Minnesota Great Apple Crunch during Farm to School and Early Care Month in October. Maybe you want to host a one-time or quarterly breakfast or lunch with a farmer meal at your school. You could also focus on increasing the number of times that a specific Minnesota item or meal repeats on your menu. Or perhaps you want to start participating in Minnesota Thursdays and offering a monthly feature for your students to enjoy. You could also look to expand what other local items you're serving during Farm to School and Early Care Month, or perhaps incorporating more local foods into a specific meal program. So it could be maybe you start with lunch or your summer meal program, or perhaps even breakfast. We do have some grant priorities that we lay out in the request for proposal. So priority will be placed on applicants that plan to buy a wide range of agricultural products, including culturally relevant foods, as well as specialty crops. And for the purpose of this grant, the MDA is using the definition of specialty crops as defined by the USDA, which we do provide the full definition in the grant RFP, so check out there. But specialty crops includes fruits and vegetables, herbs, and then other horticultural products like maple syrup and honey. We'll also just mention that applicants are also encouraged to purchase foods from a variety of producers and sources, including buying direct from individual producers, emerging farmers, farmers markets, and food hubs. Some specific examples of past projects that we've seen, just to provide you with some additional inspiration. We've seen grantees really focus on adding more local vegetables to their salad bars. We've also had grantees focused on buying local grains and flours for the first time to do baking on site. So if you have the capacity for that, you could do some baking of bread, for instance. We've also seen oats for overnight oat recipes for breakfast, adding culturally relevant foods like bison and wild rice to menus. We've seen more and more schools looking to buy local honey and maple syrup. And then also buying, kind of shifting some of their dairy purchases from maybe, their general large, company that they're working with, to, buying cheese, for instance, from a small local creamery near them. So again, just a few more examples of things you might be thinking about as you consider your application. Next, I'll share just a little bit about eligible foods for this grant. So this grant can reimburse for whole or unprocessed foods that are grown and raised in Minnesota, as well as minimally processed foods grown here in the state, which I'll share more about what that means on the next slide. And then it can also support the purchase of processed foods that include at least one primary ingredient, excluding water, that is 80% grown or raised in Minnesota. And all of these foods that would be purchased with grant funds would need to be used in the National School Lunch Program, School Breakfast Program, Summer Food Service Program, or CACFP. So some examples of unprocessed and minimally processed foods include fruits and vegetables. This could be, buying whole squash or broccoli or carrots, or you could also, minimally processed would be like frozen fruits and vegetables or pre-cut fruits and vegetables, minimally processed in that case, but that's perfectly fine for this grant. Meat, fish, and poultry. This could include, ground beef or ground turkey. It could include bacon, ham, different cuts of beef, for instance, kind of a wide variety of local protein options. Dairy, excluding fluid milk. So think, butter, yogurt, cheese, sour cream. You can buy eggs, grains. So again, wild rice. We've seen, fresh milled flour, oats, and then sweeteners like honey and maple syrup. And then some examples for processed foods. In general, processed foods, we're looking at items that are, combining multiple agricultural products to be made. Bread, tortillas, these are like pre-made. Usually there's multiple ingredients going into them, or things that have like a high amount of processing to make them. And the key here for processed foods is that we may need documentation from you, from the food maker or manufacturer that confirms that the processed food item meets the requirement for this grant, which is that the processed food needs to contain at least one primary ingredient that is 80% grown or raised in Minnesota. So looking at some of the examples here, if the granola had Minnesota grown oats in it, that could be an eligible item. We would need a letter from the granola maker confirming that. Similarly, bread, if it was made with Minnesota grown flour, tofu, if it was made with Minnesota grown soybeans. Salsa would be another processed item. If it was made with Minnesota grown tomatoes, that would be eligible. Examples of things that are not eligible for the grants. As I mentioned, fluid milk is not an eligible expense. Any produce that's grown in a school garden or at a garden or farm that's managed by an educational institution like a college or a university would not be eligible. Items that are bought for any meal or snack outside of, oops, this is a mistake on the slide, sorry about that. It would be any items bought outside of the National School Lunch Program, School Breakfast Program, Summer Food Service Program, or CACFP, depending on if you are a K-12 school district or an ECE center. Processed foods that don't contain a primary ingredient that's grown or raised in Minnesota would not be eligible. Anything for gardens like seeds, starter plants, or garden equipment is not eligible. And staff time for spent purchasing items would not be eligible either. Where to buy food. So you as a grantee get to choose where or how you are purchasing items for this grant. So some examples, you could purchase food directly from a farmer or a producer. You could work through a food hub or an aggregator. Some grantees also work through their mainline distributor to buy local products. You could buy through a farmer's market or other retail settings. The important thing to note here is that as you're deciding where to buy, You as a grantee are responsible for noting or being able to confirm that the product you're buying is in fact Minnesota grown or raised, and you will need to report to us to get reimbursed the farm or farms of origin and the farm location specifically. So again, as we've mentioned, the focus of this grant is increasing purchases of Minnesota grown or raised food items. So we just want to emphasize that, you know, this is different than just buying locally. So we're really looking for, again, you to provide confirmation that the food items you're purchasing were in fact grown or raised in Minnesota. Our state is home to many fantastic companies, manufacturers and food makers. However, just being located in our state is not what determines if a food is eligible for this grant. So a Minnesota-based company may be distributing food that's grown or raised outside of Minnesota, or perhaps selling foods that were made without ingredients that were grown or raised in Minnesota. So these would not be eligible expenses. So as grantees, again, you would need to confirm that the foods are grown or raised in Minnesota. And I think this is especially important to do when you're looking to be purchasing products from a business as opposed to an individual farmer who's producing the item. So for example, if you were interested in purchasing Minnesota raised or Minnesota cheese, you would need to check with the creamery or the business that you're looking to purchase from to confirm that the milk that's being used to make that cheese is milk from cows raised in Minnesota. Similarly, if you were looking to buy from a local butcher shop, are they using Minnesota raised beef? You would need to confirm that. Or if looking to buy eggs from a company, is that company sourcing eggs from Minnesota chickens? So just wanted to note that difference of Minnesota grown and raised versus a Minnesota company, because we know that can be a little confusing. All right, and I'll pass it to Emily next to talk about the reimbursement process. We may need to wait a minute for Emily to come back. I can get started in the meantime. So the most important thing to note is that these grants are reimbursement grants, meaning that we will reimburse you for the purchases that you make based on documentation that you submit to us. So grantees will be able to submit reimbursement requests quarterly or as needed throughout the grant period. And the documentation that is required for reimbursement requests include a reimbursement worksheet that the MDA will provide. And on that worksheet, you would just be filling in the item that you purchased, the farm that you purchased it from, the location of that farm, and how much you spent purchasing that item. We would also need proof of purchase for each eligible item that you purchase for the grant. So a proof of purchase would include a receipt or an invoice, and then proof of payment, which would be a canceled check, credit card statement, or receipt for each of those items, just to document that you bought them and the producer or business that you bought from did in fact receive payment from you, so that we can then reimburse you for that payment that you made. And just a reminder, we've kind of touched on this already, that we're looking for source identification here. So for items that you're purchasing, we will need to know that original farm name and location. So if you are purchasing items, you know, like at a retail butcher shop or a farmer's market, you would need to make sure to collect that source identification information at the time of purchase. And then for processed products, we may also need you to submit a letter providing documentation that the processed item meets the requirement of containing at least one primary ingredient that is at least 80% Minnesota grown or raised. And so the application process, as we mentioned, the applications are already open, and you would apply using the MDA's online application system, which is linked here in the slides, which we'll share out afterwards. It's also available in the request for proposals for the grants. If you've never applied for a grant from the MDA before, you will need to create an account on that platform. And then once you're logged in, you're going to be looking for the full tray or the first bite grant. There's a lot of grants that are open at MDA right now, so just make sure you're looking for the right grant and selecting that, and then you would fill out your application online. And applications are due by 4 p.m. Central Time on Thursday, October 24th, 2024. So mark your calendars. And we really encourage you to submit your grant early. Best practice would be get it submitted 24 hours in advance because we cannot accept any late applications that come in after 4 p.m. on Thursday, October 24th. All right, and I'm just checking, is Emily back on yet? Or okay, that's okay. Tech trouble.
I am. Kate, I'm here.
Are.
Yep,
Hi,
I had to
Emily.
call in on my phone, so.
Do you want to take this next slide, Emily?
Sure.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So if you are a CACFP sponsor, you may apply on behalf of eligible ECE centers. The organization may only include one center, even if you have multiple locations. A little bit confusing, but one center per application may submit an application on behalf of the ECE center. So the sponsor organization, if you are doing that, you can reach out to us if you have questions. But the ECE center must be named on the application, and a letter of support from the center must be included with the application, so that we know that the sponsor is applying, but the ECE center is supportive of that application. And this applies to both First Bite and Full Tray grants. And then just how to prepare for submitting your application. You're going to want to make sure that you review the RFPs for either the First Bite or Full Tray program that you're applying for. The RFPs are listed on the Farm to School web pages. So we'll put a link in the chat that will take you to those. But just make sure you read all the way through those. They're a little bit dense, but they have a lot of good information in them. And then you're going to want to consider what local foods you would like to source. Kind of thinking along the lines of the seasons, the different seasons that we have in Minnesota, how you can incorporate that into your meal programs. And then also thinking if you're going to need equipment that could be helpful as you're starting to prepare or process local food items. And then you would apply for the equipment grant in addition to your First Bite or Full Tray. You're going to want to develop a work plan, kind of thinking through the steps that are involved of what am I going to need to do in order to have sweet corn on the menu in September? Which farms should I connect with? What time of year should I connect with them in order to make sure that we could have that order delivered on time? Thinking through all those different steps, thinking who's going to be responsible for those different steps within your kitchen. A work plan is part of your application, so kind of the more info you can provide, the better off your application will be. As you're preparing, you can start reaching out to farmers. You don't need to have all of your plans figured out, especially if you're a First Bite applicant. We know that it takes time to build relationships and build those connections, but just kind of figuring out who you might want to reach out to, develop that plan for outreach. What resources can you tap into? Can you go to the farmers market and see if there's anybody there who might be interested in selling to a school? You can go on the Minnesota Grown website and search for farms in your area. You could check with your distributor to see what local products they're offering. So starting to think through some of those pieces of how you want to put your application together and have your program work. And then once you are serving those food items, how will you promote your local foods? So the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, we have some Harvest of the Month resources where you can get some free promotional materials. We have Minnesota grown promotional materials for free. So thinking about how you're going to highlight those products and let them shine on your menus. Again, so my name is Emily Mayer. Kate and I work at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. We sort of work on this grant program together. So if you have questions about your application, issues with your application, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help. Thanks so much. I'll pass it over to Nora now. She's going to go over some highlights from previous grantees.
Yeah, thanks so much, Emily. And we left this in, so it will get included. We'll send out, we have previously recorded some great little pieces that previous grantees have shared. So I will send that out with the recording with a link directly to just the segment. I would encourage, obviously, review this recording for the fiscal year. Some things have changed a little bit year to year, so make sure you're viewing this recording for the most up-to-date grant specific information, but there's some nice little clips that you could review if you'd be interested in some stories. And then we've been involved in some of the grant evaluation together with the University of Minnesota Extension, just about what spending has looked like. So I wanted to just super briefly highlight some of the spending to date. The next few slides, I've got information that's just spending to date of fiscal year 2023 grants. So unfortunately, this doesn't yet have early care centers in it, since those are a newer addition. And then, you know, in coming years, hopefully we'll be able to document some of the spending for the local TOTS and other ways that funding has looked. So this is all in K-12 schools that got fiscal year 2023 grants. So I just wanted to highlight where schools were purchasing from. As Kate mentioned, you know, you can purchase a wide variety of ways, and this is just how schools have been sourcing. So about half of the funds were directly to growers and producers of various kinds, and then that remaining quarter through broadline distributors, through food hubs, and wholesale means, those sort of go-between folks. And then once we cover the where, the what, just to give you some idea of how schools have purchased, this is obviously in terms of the dollar amounts. So you can see there has to date in the fiscal year 2023 grants that almost half of the purchases went to local protein, so about 48%. And then you can see just the wide variety. You can see the grains there, the dairy, as Kate was mentioning, with some caveats. There's lots of different ways that schools have purchased types of products that local schools have purchased. Okay. And then just wanted to highlight the vegetables. Mostly, I just think how cool if you look at all the, you know, you might even struggle to see all the different vegetables listed on the screen. So there's lots of different vegetables that are grown in Minnesota, and lots of different vegetables that schools purchased. About 38% of the total purchases went to fruits and vegetables combined. So on the next slide, you can see the fruit spending. If you're familiar at all with the seasonality of Minnesota, school calendars on the K-12 side, and just ease of sourcing, as a surprise to no one, apples are the far and away favorite. And I mostly brought this up, both apples are a really cool way to get started, and we've seen folks purchase local apples as a great first bite, literally and figuratively, but also to highlight there are other fruits that are grown in Minnesota that schools have successfully sourced from local growers and served on as a part of meals. Okay, next slide. And so then finally, I really just wanted to highlight some grower perspectives and wanted to mention those previous graphs. I'm the human sitting here, but wanted to name specifically Ryan Pesch at the University of Minnesota Extension, who's really done a lot of the legwork to date and a lot of a lot of this work, including sending a pulse survey to growers from the fiscal year 2023 grants, who we could locate contact information from, who provided some grower perspectives. So this is a subset, certainly a fairly small subset. It's about 59 growers, perspectives who were asked for their perspectives, and just wanted to highlight, because I think it will be probably familiar to many of you on the school side and on the early care side. Come as really no surprise that some of the challenges that growers mentioned were things about pricing and logistics and the size of orders. I think we've had schools who've really worked through those with growers in some really cool ways. And top benefits that growers see were many of the same things that we hear from schools and we hear from early care sites, of growers also seeing that sort of values alignment with their own personal values of supporting their local school and what goes on local plates. We had growers who mentioned the profitability for sourcing and providing those products to schools, and then just that community and relationship aspect. So I picked this quote because I think it illustrates a few of those things. You know, we love the connection with the amazing creative kitchen teams in each school. They're so committed and innovative. Our asparagus ended up in the kindergarten math lesson with bar graph results of a survey about whether kids liked the asparagus or even tried it. Positive reviews from the under 6 set. And so I just think I chose that quote because I think it also highlights a lot of the ways that schools and early care settings in the coming data, I'm sure, are able to make that connection both within kitchens and then also in classrooms. Obviously, as Kate mentioned, this specific grant opportunity, you know, the food that's being reimbursed needs to be served as part of the National School Lunch Program or as part of a CACFP Child and Adult Care Food Program reimbursable meal. But there are so many cool connections that I think schools and early care sites are making, and it to me is just that larger goal that so many folks on the ground are really executing and seeing value in on all sides of the equation. So for me, that's really exciting as a nonprofit partner. And with that, I think we're to, oh, we do have, if you haven't joined yet, some of the names here are familiar names, but if you haven't joined yet, please feel free to join us anytime. Once a month, we have a Farm to School and Early Care office hour, which is a great fairly informal way to just join, ask questions, figure out, you know, any challenges you're having, just an unstructured space for you to bring your questions and try to get some answers. And members of the Farm to School leadership team, Kate, Jamie, other folks. So we got ag representatives, education representatives, and folks from various different places, some food safety folks who join time to time. So if you're interested and available, please join us. There's a one-time registration, and just join us anytime on Zoom, and bring your questions or your things you'd like to talk about. So and from there, I think if anyone has questions, you could sure put them in the chat. If you'd prefer, you also should be able to unmute yourself if you raise a hand, I guess, so we don't have folks all talking at once, but I suspect that's not going to be a problem. But if you have any questions, you know, Emily and Kate are here, or feel free to put them in the chat. If you come up with questions later, there are plenty of ways to get your question answered. I will reiterate, as Kate and Emily both mentioned, you know, the application is currently open, and I would encourage folks to just get started so you know what you're working with. If you've never applied before, you know, it's a fairly straightforward process, but you do have to, you know, create a login and all of those things. And there are lots of kind humans who can help you out if you encounter technical difficulties or any other delights. As long as you've got time on your side, there's lots of ways you can get help sooner rather than later. And we've got over a month still when this opportunity is open.